Hey guys, like, comment, subscribe. Just doing a quick video on the Allen Robinson situation with the Chicago Bears. Obviously, we know the Bears unfortunately lost in the NFL playoffs to the New Orleans Saints earlier today, eliminating them from Super Bowl contention. And it puts them in a spot where obviously we know they have to deal with their quarterback situation, Mitchell Trubisky, etc. But more importantly, they have to deal with Allen Robinson. So I put together the most three likely places that I think Allen Robinson is going to play next year. Obviously, do a quick breakdown on why I think he's going to go there. And so I'll get right into that. So before even speaking about those three teams, I think it should be said that I do not think Robinson is going to return to the Chicago Bears. So obviously, going into the year, Robinson was someone with the Bears organization who they had contract talks going on with, and pretty quickly into the year, those contract talks came to a pretty abrupt end. He's someone who it became public that he wasn't happy with the way that the talks were going, and he rather just play out the rest of the year and quote wait until the off season. Which I mean, knowing that the team didn't have cap space and saying that, that pretty much was his way out to begin with. And with that being said, as mentioned, the Chicago Bears, the main issue with not being able to bring Robinson back is the lack of cap space. Now, with the projected cap maybe being closer to 195 million, opposed to the 175, which was discussed prior, if they are able to have it at that 195 figure, the Bears do have a bit more leeway, but they still don't have 15, 18 million in free cap space. And I don't think they want to use every last penny on one player, especially when they're unsure what their quarterback situation is even going to be. Allen Robinson, as a player, deserves to be paid upwards of $15 million. I wouldn't even be surprised if he gets 16, 17, $18 million per year, based on the fact that he's a consistent 1,000-yard receiver. I mean, in his second year in the NFL, this guy had 1,400 yards in it this year as well. And one of the most awkward, confusing, whatever you want to call it, seasons, he was one of the most consistent receivers day in and day out. Obviously, in this playoff game didn't necessarily get all the touches that he wanted. And I would say that's another element of why he's unlikely to stay in Chicago. If he looks at someone like Brandon Marshall, obviously he sees that he's not going to have, I guess, Hall of Fame level success in Chicago, where Brandon Marshall, maybe you could make the argument he has. He's one of the best receivers to not win a Super Bowl to ever play in the NFL, especially of our era. And Allen Robinson, obviously not wanting to put himself in that situation, where I know the Bears defense is great, but still, obviously, Robinson knows there's other places he could go where he might be more likely to win right away. So opposed to the couple of sign and trade options where I'm not counting those in the three, where I'll quickly say if a sign and trade were to occur, a couple of really good options could obviously be a team like Atlanta, who's looking to maybe dump off Julio Jones if they're somehow able to get Jones into Chicago, work out cap space however they may be, and have Robinson go the other way. That would be fantastic for them. Don't think that'll happen. Or the Dallas Cowboys, even. They're a team that is always looking for the next big thing. They already have a great receiving core, and they know eventually they're going to have to pay Michael Gallup. So I don't think they're as big as Gallup as they are in Lamb. Obviously, Murray Cooper is his own animal. So with that being said, if they're able to maybe flip Gallup in a bit of cap space to make room for Robinson, that could be a very good pickup for Dallas as well. But going into the actual signings, I think there is three teams that are probably going to be the most likely scenarios. I've seen some places, some people say places like New England. I don't think he's going to want to go there. I don't think he wants to be part of necessarily a rebuild as good as Bill Belichick and the Patriots may be able to be based on their history. I don't think that's where he's going to end up. I think he could potentially, though, end up in another AFC East division rival of the Patriots, and that's the Miami Dolphins. So on the Dolphins, obviously, they do have Devontae Parker, obviously another good receiver in Preston Williams on the coming up. Grant as well, obviously a solid receiver. But I mean, if they have a chance to land Allen Robinson, pair him with Tua, or possibly there's been talk about them getting Deshaun Watson. I mean, if they're able to pair all these guys together, that team on offense is going to look like one of the best Dolphins teams that we've probably ever seen. And I mean, himself as well being drafted into Jacksonville, seeing all the cap space Jacksonville has, that makes them a team that you might want him to go back to. But the fact that he's left them before, I think obviously he might like the environment of Florida. I don't think he would shy away from going back to Florida, but I don't think he's going to go back to Jacksonville. I wouldn't rule it out completely, but I think the more likely Florida option would be Miami. I think that's actually a very potential option for him. So I would actually wouldn't be surprised to see him go to Miami. In a just full on signing for him. I believe they do have the cap room for it, or if they don't, they could easily make the cap room for him. And then again, pairing with Tua along with Devontae Parker, some of the other weapons there, I think it would be very good for them. Their priority is probably more so on getting a running back. They might not be all in on Myles Gaskin, but again, if there is an opportunity for them to land Robinson, I think he'd be willing to go there. Second on my list in terms of places that I think Robinson may be able to go. Again, this is considering teams that actually do have the cap space for him. I think another good option would be the Baltimore Ravens. Personally, I am a pretty big supporter of the Ravens, not that they're my favorite team or anything, but just in the fact that they are a very good football team. They've been one of the more consistent teams. They had their Super Bowl run beforehand. It was hard not to love that team. And now being able to actually add a good 1-2 punch with Hollywood Brown and then potentially Allen Robinson, I think that's really what this team needs. And even if we look in this playoff game from today, Lamar Jackson again really struggled to get the weapons involved, and that might not always be on Lamar Jackson. That might be on the fact that he doesn't necessarily have all the best weapons aside from Brown and Andrews. And even in Brown and Andrews, they're not the most consistent guys in their own right. So I think Allen Robinson would in that right be exactly what Baltimore needs. John Harbaugh is a guy who he could do a lot with very little on the defensive end. So in terms of this eating up, I guess, most of their free cap space, I don't think that would hurt them. I mean, if you look at the defensive personnel that the Ravens has lost year after year, and they're able to just replace these guys essentially like it's nothing, I don't think they'll be in trouble. I think really what they need and what they've struggled to do is to bring in offensive weapons, not just aside Lamar Jackson, but I mean, since I guess they were able to bring in Steve Smith and Anquan Boldin back in the day, there hasn't been a lot of high level receivers in Baltimore. So I would think Allen Robinson in Baltimore would be a fantastic fit for both parties, where he knows he's going to a team that could win a Super Bowl next year. He gets to play with Lamar Jackson, who, I mean, I assume every receiver, every offensive weapon loves to play with Lamar Jackson or wants to play with Lamar Jackson. I could be completely incorrect there, but I mean, he seems like just one of those guys who players around the league have nothing but positive things to say about it. And Lamar Jackson, to have a weapon like Allen Robinson, it would do wonders for him. Even if it's only a 3 or 4 year contract, I think it would just be a perfect fit right now. That would be personally, as a fan, my ideal fit. But moving on, a third potential destination, the destination I guess I would be most unhappy with, probably based on the fact that growing up I was a Patriots fan, and my, I guess, rapport with this team isn't the greatest, but the Indianapolis Colts. They're a team who, again, I just don't support it based on the fact that I can't get behind them as much. But looking at Allen Robinson going there, it makes a whole of a lot of sense, to be honest. Allen Robinson in Indianapolis, I mean, I could almost close my eyes and not just picture the jersey, but the fact that they already have obviously a lot of running back options there. We'll see what they decide to move forward with. We know Jonathan Taylor will be one of those options, but regardless, they're set at running back. They're probably set next year at quarterback with Phil Rivers, and we'll see what they decide to do moving forward after that. Defensively, the Colts, I mean, the most underrated defense all year, even though they were first for their majority of the year in terms of being the top ranked defense. So obviously he knows that he's getting a very good team that he's going to. That offensive line is able to do very well on their own as well. So he doesn't have to worry about that. Versus in Chicago, Allen Robinson, I think, did have to have more of a role as a blocker, even though he was still very the primary guy in the passing game. There obviously were times where the offensive line was one of the worst in the league, especially earlier in the year. So you actually do need to rely on your receivers a bit more versus the Colts. I mean, they just don't need that. Allen Robinson is going to get to just purely play receiver 100% in Indianapolis. This is a team that without really any huge receiving targets in terms of just being a top 10 receiver, they're still a 10-6 team this year. They make the playoffs, and they would only get better with Allen Robinson there. So I think that would be a very smart pickup for both ends. They do have some of the most cap room of anyone there. So this is something where even if they bring Robinson in, he'll still have room to sign other guys. And then seeing him alongside guys like T.Y. Hilton, who's still very good in his own right, but obviously aging, Michael Pittman, who is only going into his second year. He might have a bit of a breakout year next year, but you don't want him to, I'd say, be the number one guy yet. And then obviously they have Paris Campbell as well, who misses the majority of this year due to injury. So between those guys and Allen Robinson, they're looking like they have a very good receiving core, and that's not even counting Mo Alley-Cox and Jack Doyle. So overall, I would be pretty confident in Robinson going there and finding success. They obviously have the money to pay him very well. And if I'm a Colts fan, I'd be very happy to get him. And if I'm Robinson, it seems like a very good fit for me as well. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Give us a like, subscribe, and we'll definitely see you with more content soon.